and we are nearing the end of Bava Basra. We're actually up to the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Ayin Beis, Amud Aleph. So we're in the bottom half of the page. We'll do two blocks tonight, so we'll do a pause in the middle. Mishnah. Shnei Achin, two brothers. Echad Ani ve'echad Asher. One was poor and one was rich. We had this in the first parak. In fact, I told you last time, people that are showing you wonder why this parak is in Masechta Bava Basra, when it's all about, the law of a star, when the last Gemaras we learned is all about inheritance. So some want to say because we talked about the star by a shchimer, a person who was dying. Others want to say because of this Mishnah right here, which continues dealing with the laws of inheritance. You have one poor brother and one rich brother. The father left behind among his assets, he had a bathhouse and you had an olive press. Now, in order for a bathhouse to function, you need workers, laborers who will bathe you and wash you and take care of you. And an olive press, obviously, you need to bring olives and so on. Now, the question is, what rights do the brothers have? Because one of them can afford to use it for themselves, and one of them can't. The poor person cannot afford to hire anybody, nor does he have olives to press. So it depends. Also, the father, while he was alive, he basically rented it out, and the revenue that came in, that was his income that has chalem. So then they continue behaving the same way, and the revenue is divided equally between the rich and poor brother. But also, the father, while he was alive, he used it. If the father, while he was alive, he used it for his own purpose, then the usher, Oimel Ani, tells the poor person, you could use it as well as I can use it. Go find yourself some servants. They'll bathe you. You go ahead and buy olives. Use the olive press. I'm not stopping you. But you want to rent it out to strangers. I don't have to rent it out to strangers. Our father didn't, neither do I. So the poor person, in a way, is sort of stuck. And we did have a concept in your Gimel called Gudu Yogurt. So if you have two partners and they want to break up, so they say to one partner who wants to break up says to the other one, either I buy you out or you buy me out. So good or yogurt. Either you buy me out or I buy you out. Over here, you cannot say that because the poor person does not have the option of buying his brother out. He has no money. So basically, he's stuck. Then the Mishnah continues, and I'm not sure how both of them fit into the same Mishnah. Two people lived in one city, Shem Echad, Yosef and Shimon, Shem Echad, Yosef and Shimon. They both have exactly the same name, Yosef and Shimon. And we discussed the laws about a get if they're both wives of the same name as well. The only way you can give a divorce is if both people come front up in front of the bezin. If two Yosef and Shimons, neither of them can present in front of a court a star that Yosef and Shimon lent money to Yosef and Shimon, because each one will say, in case of a dispute. So the first person who's holding on the star says, well, I'm holding on the star because you owe me money. And the other person says, no, you owed me money, but I gave you the star back when you paid me. And that's why you have the star right now. So because we cannot prove one way or another, they can never lend money to each other. Nor another person cannot produce a shtar against any of the either two, because each one will say it was the other person that borrowed the money from you, not me. Case number 3. Nimtza, what happens if nimtza le'echa, they found by one person, they found it by one person amongst his contracts that he had sitting by him. There was a contract there that says that the contract to Yosef Shimon Perua has been paid up. But we don't know which Yosef and Shimon. This lender happened to lend money to both Yosef and Shimon's, and he had by himself a contract where it says that Yosef and Shimon's contract has been paid up. We don't know which one it is. Ishnei and Prui. The law is that you cannot collect from either contract, because each one will say, mine is the one that was paid up. He's Kated Yasser. What do you do? And the Gemara will explain this. So what do you do in the case you have two Yosef and Shimon? How do they function? Yishaleshu. The only way to distinguish between the two is go back another generation. Don't just say Yosef and Shimon. Yosef and Shimon ben Reuven versus Yosef and Shimon ben Levi. The grandfathers have different names, so that's how you identify them. The Imai Mishalashin, what happens in sheer luck, they have exactly the same name, the grandfathers as well. Then Yichtavu Simon, write a Simon, write Yosef and Shimon the shorty. or Yasim and Shimon the Baldy, or Yasim and Shimon the albino, and this way you know who's who. But Vim Hayisimani Shavin, what happened? They both were exactly the same height, width, and everything else, same color, same hair. Then Yikasvu Kohen. Add the word Kohen if one of them is Kohen, the other one is not. It's interesting why that isn't an earlier option. The easiest thing to do is if you have Yasim and Shimon, one of them is a Kohen, just say Yasim and Shimon Kohen. Why is this like the last alternative? Later in the Gemara, we're going to learn the Brisa that says that you can go a fourth generation. Just keep on going back until you finally find some distinction between the two. Last names didn't exist in those days. I'm not 100% sure when the last names existed. We know by Eden, we have a few last names that go back almost 1,000 years. Margolis, Katz and Katzenelnbergen and some other names that go all the way back, Sego. But generally, there's no last names in those days, so therefore, these are the only alternatives. Says the Gemara. So interesting, we have a concept called an IOU, but a star documents the lender and the borrower. But what happens, and generally we have a rule that if somebody comes in with a star, whoever's holding on to it, probably that's who belongs to. What happens if you have an IOU and you did not write the name of the person who the U is? You wrote who the I is, I, Pliny and Pliny, but you didn't write the U. You didn't describe the U. So do we automatically assume that the U is the person holding on to this IOU? And therefore he's entitled to collect. And what happens obviously is the borrower is denying that he owes the money, or he's denying that you ever lent him the money. It wasn't intended for you, somebody else. Says the Gemara. So we're going to have an argument between Rav Huna and Rav. Ahush thought it was a contract enough of the Bein that came out, that was appeared before Bezin, that Rav Huna, David Kosabe, said the following: Ani Pliny ben Pliny. So the borrower identified themselves. Lavisi money mimcha. I borrowed $100 mimcha from you. Then I owe you. How do we deal with it? Amar Rav Huna said, and the majority of the Rishonim learned the following way. Mimcha, and he asked the question, Afilu mereish galusa, Afilu mishaber malka. Because there's no identifying name, how do we really know whose it is? It's possible that really it was made out to someone else totally, and that person dropped it, and this guy here is holding on to it, found it, says he was not the real lender. So it's a question mark. I feel maybe that the loan was made by the Reish Galusa Shabbat Malka, and they dropped it, and this guy found it. Others learn that it's actually a statement. That Rav Huna says we do believe the IOU, and we say that even if this particular person happens to be Reish Galusa, and what is the probability that the Reish Galusa would lend money to an individual person? Highly unlikely. But nevertheless, if the Reish Galusa lent money to this, if he came with this star in his hand, we should believe him. But most Rishonim don't learn this way. It's a question. Rav Huna says we don't believe him. The reason is we suspect, because there's no name there, we suspect, or they have a creeping suspicion that it fell down and this person picked it up. That's Rav Huna's view. And we have this now, the continuing discussion we have many times, because Rav Chizda and Rabbi Rav Huna were all in the same era. We're in Avkuf Ayin Beis, Amud Beis on the top of the page. And the last thing we're learning about is that Rav Huna came along and said, if somebody comes in an IOU and there's no identifying name, but he's holding on to it, Rav Huna says we don't trust that this person is actually the lender, because it could be he just found it. So Amalei Chizda, 2 lines from the top of the page, Chizda said, Le Rabba to Rabba, Puk, go out, Ayinba, go out and examine this halacha of Rav Huna that we don't trust the person bearing the IOU. Because tonight I am sure Rav Huna is going to query you and see whether you agree with his sentiment or not. So Nafik Rabba went out, Dok, he investigated, and the Ashkach, and he found a brisa that completely argues with Rav Huna. And that is that even though the name is not stipulated in the contract, but if he's holding on to it, if he's holding on to it, then we can assume that he is the rightful lender. And how do I know that? Because we have a din by Gittin that a get needs a date. You need to have the names of the people, you need a date, you need to have witnesses signed in the get. So what happens if there was no date in the get? So we say that midrabanan, it's not a valid get. And then we discussed what happens if you didn't What happens if you didn't comply and you went ahead and she married again? Are the children considered mamzeir or not? According to a mayor, it is because you didn't follow the ways of Chachamim. But according to the Chachamim, b'di'evet, it's all right. So this is the story there. Time we learn. Get sheyesh olav edim. There were witnesses signed, but there's no date on it. It's not a valid get. Comes along Abba Sholem says, but if you wrote the following clause, even though it's very cryptic, we're going to treat it as if it's clearly written there. What's that? Im kosuv boy, if it's written in the get, yerashtia hayom. Today, the same day the get was written, we divorced this woman. Kosher is kosher. Why is it kosher? So Rabbah understood the reason why it's kosher is because even though there's no specific date written on it, but there were two witnesses who witnessed the transfer of the get. They know exactly which day it is. And he said that the day that the get was given to her is the same day that you wrote the get. It's as if the date of the get is inscribed in the get. And therefore it's good enough. So I'm going to use the same logic and say that if there's an IOU, even though it doesn't say the name of the person, it's the person who's holding it is as if this document, the IOU, is written saying that that person's holding it is the name that's included in the shtar. Same, just like a date. It's not written a date, but because he's saying it's today, so therefore we know what day you're talking about. Same over here. Since he's saying I owe you, and the person's holding on to the shtar, we'll assume it's not only they'll assume the person the lender, it's as if it's included in the document, and it should be kosher. So Rabbah disagrees with Rav Huna, and he says clearly that the IOU is valid and he can collect the money. As the Gemara explains. Alma, what is he from here? Hayomahu, that day is Yoimid the Nafik Bay, the day that it was produced. Mashma, the very day that she was given, that's the day it was written. So as if that date was included. Is Hachanami here too, Mimcha, if you wrote an IOU from you. Mahu Gavra the Nafik Metusiyad and Mashma. What do you mean who? Which you? The person who's holding on to this IOU is probably that person that was a lender, and therefore it's as if it's written clearly in the shtar. That's what Rabbi wants to say, and therefore he argues the Rabbuna. Abai, of course, Abai has to challenge him. Abai said to Rabbi, "How do you know that is what the Abba Shol is talking about? I can tell you there's a whole different shot. Remember, we learned a short while ago. There's an argument between Rameh and Rabbi Lazar. The primary witnesses that are involved in a get, who are they? According to Rabbi Meir, it's the Eidim that signed the actual divorce papers. They're the main witnesses. They're the ones who make it happen. According to Rabbi Lazar, Eidim Mesirikase, it's the witnesses who witness the transfer. They're the ones who make it happen. In fact, technically, you don't need any witnesses signed on the get at all. The only reason why we have witnesses signed the get, according to Rabbi Lazar, is Tikkun ha'olam. That is, in the future, 10, 15 years, if people will query whether she's divorced or not, she can produce the bill of divorce and show them, you see, I was divorced, and there are witnesses signed therein. Otherwise, there's no need for witnesses. So therefore, Abaye says, just like Rabbi Lazar holds, that you don't really need witnesses, so too, you don't really need a date. You don't need a date, not because we imagine the date is written in. You don't need a date because the Eidim who gave it over, they know exactly when the get was given. So therefore, Abaye says, so that has nothing to do with the case of Rav Huna. But in the case of Rav Huna, we are worried that maybe the person who's holding on to it just happened to find it in the streets, and we're not going to pay him out. So Abaye Vadilma Abba Show Rabbi Lazar, Abba Show like Rabbi Lazar, Eidim Mesidikarsi, the Eidim who which is the transfer. Abel Hach over here in Rav Huna's case, Rav Huna's right. You know why Rav Huna's right? Why if a person holding IOU and no name on it, we won't give him the money? Because Leichel shouldn't feel it. We are concerned that maybe the real lender drops it and you just found it. Oh, Malay Rabba said to his student Abaya, I disagree with you totally. Why should we be suspicious suddenly that this person found it and someone lost it? There has to be a reason, there has to be grounds for such a suspicion. I mean, we have no grounds for it. So if a person comes in holding on a document IOU, we'll trust him. Because we know possession is 9/10 of a woman. And Rabbi goes further. How do I know that we're not worried about the loy chashin? So we're not worried about maybe he fell down. None. From the very Mishnah we just learned. What did the Mishnah say? We just learned the Mishnah. There were two people residing in a town with the same names, and it causes them a lot of issues. Because sometimes you don't know who it is. There's no pictures and photographs in those days. So there were two people residing in the same city. Shem Echad Yosef and Shimon, Shem Echad Yosef and Shimon. They both had the same name, Yosef and Shimon. So our Mishnah says, they can never lend money to each other because they cannot prove who it is. Because if one of them, if Yosef Shimon A produces a star to Yosef Shimon B and says, you owe me $100, and Haraya, I'm holding the star, Yosef Shimon B will say, what are you talking about? I was the lender, and you paid me the money, so I gave you back the star, and that's why you have it. How can you turn around now and say that you lent me money? So we'll never be able to prove who's telling us the truth. But they shouldn't lend to each other, and nor nobody else can lend the money either, because each one of them will say, it wasn't me, you must have given to the other guy. And in a court of law, how are we going to prove who's right and who's wrong? So we inferred, but let's say Yosef and Shimon, either one of them, they can lend to other people. They can lend to other people because and why? Because they're holding on the document. But how do we know? Maybe the other Yosef and Shimon lost it, and this Yosef and Shimon found it. Just like Rav Huna says, that we are worried that the person who's holding the IOU just happened to find it. So the same thing with two Yosef and Shimons. Why do we say that if they lend money to somebody else, we'll trust whoever's holding on to it, the rightful owner? Maybe not. Maybe the other person is the rightful owner. And he dropped it and you found it. From here we can prove we're not worried about that it fell down. Does the Gemara know what's about to counter that? So therefore, Rabbah says, I'm not worried about the tefillah. I disagree with Rav Huna. If a guy's holding on to IU, we trust that this is the true lender. But Abai says there's a big difference between the case of two Shimon ben Yosef and the case of Rav Huna. In Shimon ben Yosef's case, you're saying two things. That maybe one Shimon ben Yosef dropped it, and who found it? In the city of thousands of people, that the other Shimon ben Yosef found it. That's highly unlikely. Such a nefillah we're not worried about, and that's why the Mishnah says that Yosef and Shimon can produce a star and collect from other people. Probably he is the rightful lender. But in the case of Rav Huna, every single person who would have found it could have claimed that they were the true lender. And therefore, there's a possibility that one person dropped it, and then any other person could have found it, and now is standing in court. And that is highly more probable, highly more likely, and therefore, at least you want to take money out. Remember, it has to be sort of conclusive, and we don't know what actually happened here. If one person fell down, we are not worried. In other words, if you're telling me that Yosef ben Shimon lost it, and possibly the other Yosef ben Shimon found it, what are the chances of that happening in a whole city? Two things. First of all, one guy dropped it. And second of all, the only person who found it was the one with the same name. Highly unlikely. And therefore, if we'll trust whichever person, whichever Yosef Shimon is holding on to this loan contract, they're probably telling the truth. But when it comes to a case where a guy walks with an IOU and there's no name on it, we don't really know it's his. Maybe it's somebody else's, because anybody would have found it. They could come and claim that they're the lender. And maybe you're that anyone. Okay. So the Gemara continues in Kufa and Gimel Amud Aleph. So clearly we just said that Yosef and Shimon can lend money to other people, and we'll trust that if he's holding on to the document, it's probably him. So now the Gemara is going to bring a brisa which actually argues with that point, and we're going to try to understand what is the crux of that argument. The Helaha, the Tanya, we learned, shame, just like in the brisa it says, just like one Yosef and Shimon cannot lend money to the other one, because we don't know at the end of the day who's lending, who's the borrower, nor can they lend to others. Clearly disagrees with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that Yosef Shimon can lend to someone else, and if he's holding on to the contract, probably he is the rightful lender. But the Brisa clearly says they cannot even lend to others. What's going on? What's the crux of the argument? So we had a few days ago, a short while ago, the concept whether Oisius can be, in other words, if I have a contract, Reuven lent money to Shimon, and now Reuven wants to sell the contract. He needs the money. He needs funds urgently, so he's prepared to sell it 80 cents to the dollar. He sells it to Levi. How does he sell it to Levi? Can he just give him the contract and that's enough, or he has to write a contract of sale for that contract? So how do we view a loan contract? There's two ways of viewing it. One way of viewing it, a loan contract is basically a piece of paper with words on it, and you owe the money because I lent you the money, and the paper is just a proof that you owe me the money. Or no, it's much more than that. That paper has power. The words in that paper is powerful. It's a commodity in its own right. If you learn that the paper itself is a commodity in its own right, then I can sell it to you by transferring it to you, or transfer the commodity like any other commodity. Mesira, it's one of the kinyanim, one of the methods of acquiring. But if you learn that it's just a paper with words on it, it's not the words that make the power, so then I giving it to you doesn't do it. Well, I gave you the piece of paper. How do I transfer the loan itself? which is not a tangible. For that, I have to write another star that I'm selling you this paper with all of its contents, the whole shibudeh. Okay, so that's called the machlekes with Rebbe and the Chamim, where the oisis can be acquired just by transferring it. And we're going to say this is the possibility. We're not worried that it fell down. We're not with the two Yasim Shimons, we're not worried that it fell down. But you know what? We are worried that there's a possibility that the other Yasim Shimon gave it to this Yasim Shimon. Yasim Shimon 1 gave it to Yasim Shimon 2. The question is, did he give it to him just to mine for him as a pekadon, or did he sell it to him? So Yasim and Shimon is holding onto the star, says, I bought it, I acquired it, and now you owe me the money. And even though I didn't lend you the money, but I bought the rights from the other Yasim and Shimon. And obviously the borrower says no. Maybe it's only a pekadon. Maybe you never. How did you acquire it? By giving it to you, but it's not a valid kinyan. So it still belongs to the first Yosef ben Shimon. Now, what does the borrower gain by doing that? He still has to pay the first Yosef ben Shimon. No, he doesn't, because he tells the first Yosef ben Shimon, "You want me to pay you? Give me back my contract, my loan contract. You don't have it. You get it back first, and then give it back to me." And that's the crux of the argument. Says the Gemara. My commitment, where the argument, where the ISIS can be just transferred. Did on our Mishnah holds ISIS, Nixon, Masira, so the other Yosef Shimon holding on to, even though he agrees, I didn't lend you the money, but now that I own this document, you owe it to me. The Tana Brasava, the Tana the Brisa says, ain't ISIS, Nixon, Masira. A transfer of a document is not enough to be paid, and therefore the borrower says, I don't have to pay you. And you also have to pay the first guy, the other Yosef Shimon, unless he can give me back my contract. That's one way of looking at it. Or I could say, everyone agrees, just by transferring the document, it's a commodity, it is a valid kinyan. So what's the argument? They're arguing in the following case. Abaye and Rava argue in the case where Reuben lent money to Shimon and then he sold it to Levi. And now Levi has the document. Because the name Levi is not the lender, in the document itself, it says Shimon lent money, Reuben lent money to Shimon. And now Levi is holding on to it. So one opinion says, and I'm going to buy whatever. Abaye says that Levi has to prove that he actually bought this document because it's suspicious. It's not his name there. What are you collecting someone else's loans for? You say that you own it, now prove it. And Rava says we have a general rule: whoever's holding on to something, possession is 9/10 of the law. Probably he's telling the truth that he bought it. So now we're going to carry over that argument and say, in our Mishnah, where they both have the same name. So on the one hand, it's not really suspicious because Yosef and Shimon lent the money, and that's a fact. But at the end of the day, Yosef Shimon is agreeing that it's not, he wasn't the lender, the other guy was the lender. Do we still need to bring evidence or proof before he can use this and collect money with this document? And that's the argument on Mishnah Brisa. So Gemara explains. You don't have to bring proof. Tana holds, ain't tzarich lahavirai. You don't have to bring any proof. You don't have to bring any proof, and therefore the borrower pays. It's a valid document. The Tana Braba, the Brisa holds, if Yosef ben Shimon, the other Yosef Shimon, is holding on to the document, and he agrees that it's the other Yosef Shimon who actually lent the money, Sodich b'haviraya, has to be approved. Now prove it. Ditma. Where do we know there's such an argument? We have a similar argument between Abaye and Rava. If Levi is holding on to a document where it says Reuben lent money to Shimon, Abaye says the Levi has to prove that legitimately it's his. And Rava says, the fact that it's sitting in Shimon's possession, in Levi's possession, probably he bought it. Why else would it be sitting by Levi? We don't automatically become suspicious that he stole it. Omar Abaye said, I'll prove it to you. The time we learned, one of the brothers, there was an estate. And they were about to divide the estate, and one of the brothers suddenly produces a shtar loan in the name of his father, that and he claims that my brothers gave me Masira, they gave me the shtar as part of the division of the estate, they gave me the shtar. And therefore, and they claim, no, you stole the shtar. We never gave it to you. And therefore you're not koina. So Echad says in the Brisa, Echad min ha'achin shtar chav, if one of the brothers has a shtar chav in his hand, all of the havi the brother has to prove that he gave it to him legitimately. So what is he clear from there? That if you have a shtar that you weren't the lender, someone else was, you need to prove that the shtar is in your possession legally. My lab huadin, the same thing applies. Why should be a difference in the case between brothers or anybody else? So the same thing here applies here. If Levi bought this contract, Reuben lending money to Shimon, Levi needs to have proof that he actually bought it. Rava says no, you cannot compare that to two cases. You know why? Shiny ach, in the case of the dividing the assets of their father, the brothers have certain feelings of entitlements, and therefore it could very well be, and they're constantly taking from each other. They convince themselves that this is the right thing. I worked much harder for my old father than you guys did. If I'm entitled to more things, they take a lot of liberties when they shouldn't. So therefore, when it comes to brothers, says Rava, we need to bring proof that you actually took it legitimately. But anybody else, we assume, why is it sitting in Levi's possession? He probably bought it. Shiny Achin the Shogun that they steal from each other. Ikidami, others say, oh, Rava, another version is Rava said, exact same argument, but he uses it as a proof. How do I know that generally speaking, you don't have to bring any proof? The time we learned, one of the brothers came out of his possession. Oh, we has to bring a proof. It said by brothers, if one of the brothers produces a star of the money, he has to prove it. It seems only brothers could they steal from each other. But others don't have to. Baya, no, I'm right. You don't have to bring any proof. And the Bible will say, Achin itzichle. No, you always have to bring proof. But there's a chiddush by brothers. Because the brothers don't trust each other, they know that everyone takes a lot of liberties. They're much more vigilant. And they're going to make sure that no one takes it. So if one of the brothers ends up with the star, maybe he's telling the truth, that he received it legitimately. And the chiddush is that even there you have to prove that you have. So that doesn't mean that even the shon madar they took by Aimam is the brothers are much more vigilant. Let's see, I don't think improved Kamashal, let you do. So we'll pause over here and we'll do the next block in 30 seconds.